Honored to introduce this roundtable of this afternoon. The title is Magic and Queer Life in the 20th Century California, and it will make us go a little bit back in time. In the United States, the Stonewall riots in 1969 were a fundamental moment for the LGBTQIA rights. It led to a progressive decriminalization, protection, and affirmation of their life amongst the society. But before that, queer people were mostly oppressed, living undercover, and they were gathering in groups that were not officially affiliated with gender or identity politics. Occult communities were one of them. And I'm already quoting you, Alexis. It offered a creative mode for artists and writers to explore prophetic visions that exceeded the natural limitations of the world. Queer artists, such as the prominent figure of Kenneth Anger, took part of them and made incredible films which became cult in the contemporary art field. After the Stonewall riots, magic and activism got deeply intertwined. Some witchcraft practices, occult ceremonies, and ritual became part of queer contre-culture. Groups affirming a life outside of capitalism, industrial patriarchy, such as the Radical Fairies, expanded in the US and in Europe and continue today to grow and fight for an inclusive and ecological life, interlaced first with all being, be they non-human, but also interlaced with the force of the earth. So, to explore the role of magic in queer communities in California throughout the 20th century, we're honored to have with us three specialists. So I know you count two here, but there is one other online. So thank you for your participation. Judith Noble. Oh, here you are, Judith. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Judith. So actually, I wanted to start to say a few things about you. First, so Judith, you are a professor emerita of film and the occult at the Art University in Plymouth. You began your career as an artist filmmaker, and then you worked for over 20 years as a production executive in the film industry. Your research encompasses artist moving image, surrealism, the occult, and you have published on filmmakers such as Maya Deren, Derek Jarman, and Kenneth Anger. Your most recent publication include The Dance of Moon and Sun, Elle, concentre, British Woman and Surrealism, and a text on Kenneth Anger, which we will for sure speak about in this incredible publication, which I have here, Sci-Fi, Magic, and Queer LA. Judith, you are also a board member of the Research Network for Esoteric Practices. You're a co-founder of the Black Mirror Research Network and the artist collective, the Inner Space Exploration Unit. I also wanted to introduce Julien Princesse Didier, who is among us today. Julien, you are a queer environmentalist and ecological activist. You work with the Belgium organization Mycelium, who published your essay, We Are Disruptive Nature, Tracing Queer Ecology Pathway in 2023. And you explore queer ecological concepts as well as rural queer community organizing practices. You co-translated and wrote the introduction for the French edition of Witchcraft and the Gay Contre-culture, which I have here, which is a collection of essays on Arthur Evans, and it sparked your interest in its ideas and his contribution to the question of spirituality and magic in the American gay movement. We also have with us today Alexis Bard Johnson. Alexis, you're curator at the One Archive at the UCS Library in Los Angeles, which is one of the largest repositories of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer material. You have curated a number of exhibitions, such as The Space We Take, Portrait from the Archive, and Holding Pattern by Alexandra Joas. But more specifically, and this is why we've invited you, you curated this wonderful exhibition, so this was the catalog of the exhibition, Sci-Fi, Magic, Queer LA, Sexual Science, and the Imagination. Your essay, Queer Visibility, Photography in American Print Culture, was recently published in the Getty Museum Queer Lens exhibition catalog. And you do hold a PhD in art history. And before joining One Archive, you worked at the Princeton Art Museum, the Whitney Museum, and the Terra Foundation for American Arts. So we're going to start with you, Lexi. If you could, so we can start the PowerPoint. Yes. So Lexi, could you maybe start to describe this amazing exhibition, which just closed last year, and introduced also this important and contested figure of magic, Aleister Crowley?
Sure. I want to say thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure to present on this work. I also feel like a bit of an interloper on a whole symposium on magic, given that before doing this exhibition, I really worked as a curator and queer art historian. And this show was my foray into the field of occultism, esotericism, magic, science fiction, and all of that. So that said, this exhibition started, it was funded by the Getty Foundation as one of their Pacific Standard Time exhibitions that they commission about once every 5 years. And they give a theme of art and science. It was Art and Science Collide. And as a queer archive, we thought a lot about what we were going to do and what we were going to present. And to make a kind of very long story, if you want to know the long story, you can read the book, much shorter. One of our founders of the archive, which has been around since the 1950s, of beginning of queer organizing in the US, is very involved with science fiction. And maybe we can go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. And you'll see him, Jim Kepner. And so he was involved with science fiction, particularly. And there was a big question at the archive of how these things were related, and if they were related, if queerness in the US and the early kind of queer movement, which started in the 1950s, had something to do with science fiction and the occult. Obviously, the fact that there's an entire exhibition says, yes, there was, but that's really what we found out and discovered throughout this process of thinking about how early queer individuals, of course, they would not have used the term queer at the time, found each other. And it was through these science fiction communities and also occult. And this is where the title of magic comes in, and Aleister Crowley. And I think just to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today, this distinction that Crowley, who's a kind of big figure based in England, comes up with his own religion, basically takes over this esoteric organization called the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. He makes a distinction between magic with a C in English versus CK. The magic with a C is kind of the illusion, stage magic, sleight of hand, where you go see a magician and he makes, the rabbit appear out of the hat and things like that. And for Crowley, the magic with a CK was this alchemical, tangible magic. And so that became really important to this community. And kind of jumping ahead in our process of the exhibition, and maybe we can go to the next slide too, we'll just send in a minute, really map to kind of early transition. In a lot of ways, once we saw this, you couldn't unsee it. In other words, if you're thinking about individuals who wanted to exist and live life outside the mainstream norms in the US, then places like occult, esoteric practices, or science fiction places that were about transforming one thing into another became really important. And so I see lots of people taking pictures, which is great. There's also, if you do buy the book, there's a poster of this in the back, and I'm happy to share it. This became our kind of mind map into the field, and I think something we'll touch on in lots of different ways. So we were trying to really trace these early influencers like Jim Kepner and others, but all these connections started to abound, and I think we'll get into Harry Hay, who lots of people know of as one of the founders of the Mattachine Society, or early queer organizations, also as co-founder of Radical Fairies. What I didn't know before this project was that he also played the Gnostic Mass for the OTO in LA, in Los Angeles. So we started kind of applying a bit of pressure, and all these kind of cross-contaminations or cross-sections emerged, things that we didn't think were related, became kind of center stage. And maybe we can look at the next image. I mean, maybe we'll skip over Lisa Ben for the moment. I can just mention her very briefly, just to say that this is more on the kind of science fiction part of things, but everything blurs together. And so for those who don't know this figure, she maybe biggest claim to fame is that in 1947, she wrote the first lesbian zine ever. I'm using Lisa Ben. It's an anagram for lesbian. She was born Edith Ide. Before that, she went by Tigrina the Devil Doll and was very involved in science fiction, but also, as you can tell, interested in the occult, black magic, dark arts. She writes, she came from a very conservative family, and she writes to her family basically saying, I want to do the opposite. And I think that that's a really telling statement, because for a lot of these individuals who are what we now say queer, doing the opposite or finding something that kind of supported your beliefs was really important. So Tigrina found science fiction, but also kind of an interest in black magic, also cats, if you're into cats. Another thing, she's a whole book. These are all collages. They're kind of amazing about spells and witchcraft and black magic. Okay, I can continue. And maybe this is just an installation. We'll skip that. And one more, please. Okay, so basically, to make this longer story short, and kind of to pull the connections through, the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society, LASFS, became one of these big hubs for connection in queer community. It wasn't obviously queer on the surface, but lots of people found each other, and including people who you might know from kind of what we think of as the occult side. So Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, both were members of Science Fiction Society. L. Ron Hubbard, before he goes on to build Scientology, actually wrote science fiction. You're seeing one of his books, Slaves of Sleep, in the case below, and on top is a original drawing by Hannes Bach. But the other connection is with Jack Parsons. So, and I think a lot of this panel, maybe we'll get into California particularly, but one of the things that's interesting, of course, about California and the United States is this kind of Western frontier. People move out here, the light is different, and one of the things that takes place is an exploration in science and technology, and Jack Parsons, the figure you're seeing on the right, basically creates rocket fuel. At the same time, he's interested in science fiction and the occult, and to make a very long, complicated, very salacious story about stealing women and affairs and things, very short, we'll just say that he ends up basically being in charge of the OTO in Los Angeles by about 1942, moves it to Pasadena, and he really is interested in Thelema, which is Crowley's religion, and this main principle of do what thou wilt, and the exploration through sex magic rituals, which he performs with L. Ron Hubbard, of making kind of a Lady of Babylon or a Scarlet Woman who he thinks arrives after one of these rituals, and that's Cameron on the right, who's the painter. And so we had a lot of her works in the film and the exhibition, and Parsons, and especially Cameron, after Parsons' death, when he blows himself up in 1952, I believe, Cameron goes on to be part of the circle that I think Judith will talk more about with Anger and Renata Drex and others that really kind of puts forth. So maybe that's enough.
Okay, thank you. So yes, you were saying also that the artist Kenneth Anger was involved and he participated to some of the he was really fascinated by the figure of Aleister Crowley. So maybe Judith, if you're here, I wanted to, yes, you have conducted extensive research on Kenneth Anger, who is a queer artist and who created films in the field of the underground and experimental cinema. He died just a few years ago in 2023. And you say, I quote, that his magical practice is indivisible from his identity as a queer filmmaker. And fascinated by Aleister Crowley, he made this film, Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, in 1954, where aesthetics, his aesthetic combines occult symbolism with queer culture, cross-dressing camp, and we can show some excerpt of this film, and maybe just after you can explain us the magical and ritualist feature which are present. But would you like to say just a few words before to introduce the excerpts?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I apologise that I'm not with you in person. I'm desperately sorry, but the airline cancelled the first part of my flight, so it became really difficult to get to you. So anyway, at least I'm here in the ether. And so, yes, Kenneth Anger is a key figure who crosses boundaries between queer culture, the occult, and filmmaking. And he becomes later in the 60s, he becomes the absolute darling of the counterculture, the muse of the Rolling Stones, and everything he does is inspired by ritual magic. His magic is founded on the work of Aleister Crowley, but he transcends that and makes it his own. And there's really, just before we watch the clip from Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, which he made in 1954, there's just a couple of things I want to say. One is that this film is often considered to be part of the counterculture because it wasn't seen very much until the mid to late 1960s. Anger became really widely famous after 1963 when he made his biker leather movie, Scorpio Rising. But before that, his early works weren't seen very much. But this isn't a counterculture movie. It's very much part of the queer science fiction occult scene in LA in the 1950s that Alexis just introduced. And the second thing just to say is that this is a magical ritual. That's how he intended it to work. So relax into it. You're only seeing part of it here. And for him and for the magicians he was working with at this time, the queer magicians, the important ideas in ritual magic were about, firstly, reconciling what they considered to be male and female aspects of their own persona, and then going beyond reconciling those aspects and transcending gender entirely. They use the key figure of Baphomet, the god figure popularized first by Eliphas Levi in France in the 19th century, and they really worked around that. So it's useful to know that. The Scarlet Woman you'll see in these extracts is Marjorie Cameron, who Lexi just mentioned. And with that, I think can we watch the clip, please? Thank you.
Chiedendo non posso del nostro festa. Sin amori agli non rodano. Io tozza bastennado, e se surgna ozu im sensia vive se nas radix filatek il radin nascos passigna Ipocriti si può tutta spenta, i santi e ghetti.
Thank you. That's a short clip. And shall I speak a little about the filmmaking?
Yes, that would be great if you want to say just a few words about the features that were properly both queer and magical.
Absolutely. So what Anger does very much at this stage, in this early stage in his career, is he combines a very, very camp sensibility where he's working with popular culture images with ritual magic, which is a quite strange and heady combination, but it works really beautifully in this film. I do hope people will get take the opportunity to watch the whole film, because it's quite magnificent. It's I just want to say a little bit about the people involved. Its origin was in a party given by Anger's friends and fellow occultist artists Renata Drux and Paul Matheson at their house in Malibu, where guests were invited to come as their own madness. And Anger basically took the people who had done that, been in that party, and made them into the dramatis personae for his film. So you see the writer Anais Nin, who plays the moon goddess Astarte, fellow queer filmmaker Curtis Harrington, who is Cesare the Somnambulist, and various other people. Paul Matheson plays Pan, and the whole thing is kind of orchestrated by two characters, one male, one female, who we see rather as two halves of the same being. So this is Lord Shiva, a magician figure, played by the great camp Hollywood character Samson de Brea, who hosted Hollywood soirees from the 1940s right through to his death in the 1980s, at which movie stars and all sorts of people turned up, and Marjorie Cameron, who is the Scarlet Woman Babylon. And so what happens in the film is it's a ritual to the god Pan, who is invoked, and you saw him appear momentarily in that clip. The people acting are not acting in the conventional sense. He called this a convocation of theurgists. Theurgy is the practice of drawing a deity down into a human through invocation. The deity is present in the person. So that's what's happened to these performers in this film. So they're not acting naturalistically. The use of colour is completely drawn from Aleister Crowley's colour theories, which are quite complex, too complex to explain here. And many, many images in the film are taken from the Thoth tarot deck designed by Frida Harris for Aleister Crowley. That's a really quick rush through the film. Would you...
Thank you, Judith. I think what we're going to do is that if you stay with us, we'll see if we can show a second excerpt, but maybe what I wanted to pass now the mic to Julien Princesse Didier, and to try to explore more the field of magic and radical ecology, because in one of the films that Kenneth Anger did, there are some features, more pagan element. We'll see if we'll show it. But you just finished you just published the translation of Arthur Evans, who was an American and gay activist, and he created in the US the Weird Sister, and then in the 70s a group called the Radical Fairies. So maybe you could explain to us who was Arthur Evans and what are the Radical Fairies.
All right, so we're just going to do a bit of, I'm not going to explain it all because there's too much, but a jump in time, because we spoke about Aleister Crowley, like he died actually in 1947, if I'm right. Like Arthur Evans was born in 42, so, and mostly active post Stonewall, so in the 70s and the 80s, so also post Kenneth Anger, who was mostly active. I mean, like the film was in 54, you said. So yeah, we're jumping one generation, and there are main differences, which is the fact that then the way he thinks magic is deeply associated with gay activism. Actually, he's not a magician before, like Arthur Evans is much more an intellectual, interested in philosophy, and then he finds himself in a turmoil of Stonewall in New York in the 70s, and he's really interested, like he participates to the gay liberation movement, to Gay Activist Alliance, so really much in the street. And then, I guess, like due to a spiritual quest, or maybe more an intellectual quest, actually, he's got an inspiration from a friend who's Leo Martello, who's a Wiccan priest. So, like inspired by the Wicca, also older current. And more specifically like a current, like a pagan current in the weekend. And so that triggers his curiosity, and he will look further. And he's actually like going through a whole history, political history of not only witchcraft, but also heresy and paganism. And that's how he came with this book, which, I mean, I love the cover. It's a figure of the horned god, and which was published in 1978. And so basically it's the research around what we could say like what he sees as queer ancestors through marginalized religions in Europe, like along, I mean, not only Europe actually, but like in all the world that is been like destroyed by the empire. So a pagan in the antique world, the heretics in the Middle Age, witchcraft in the Renaissance, all the magic and just religions from the pre-colonial world. And he just creates like he creates this thread between them, which is, I mean, a gesture we can discuss, but for him, they all have in common to have like a religion and forms of spirituality that are deeply magic because deeply connected to the earth, and that's how we can get to ecology, but also deeply connected to forms of free sexuality. And so that also connects to his precursors, but in a very different way. And we can talk about after the distinctions between them because they're major. But yeah, so he really comes with this like idea that queer people have always been here, but not only this, but also in a way that they were always connected to a spirituality that would embrace actually queerness that wouldn't exist obviously per se, but like sexual diversity, let's say, or sexual freedom within society and included with religious roles. So he loves to talk about the transvestite priest, or like the effeminate priest in different cults, and how actually they would have a real function in society. So that's really like his goal, to find that like queer people have a positive role in society actually. And yeah, and to get back to your question about ecology, that's also to maintain and to cultivate a religion that celebrates the power of plants and animals and the living beings in a more animistic approach, we could say, or magical approach. And so, yeah, kind of like for him, like queer people are the guardians of a religion that celebrates life everywhere and in ourselves and out of ourselves.
And we just have here a quote that you wanted to...
Oh, it's a very long quote. I didn't realize it would be that long. Maybe we can go to the next to the next quote. Actually, that would. So actually, there's another. Yeah, I will get back to this later. But I just maybe the one I wanted to read to you now, not to make it too long, is like, because like we're talking about magic, so he doesn't use the CK stuff, and I think they have very different definition of magic, and so I got to find the one that Evans proposed. He says, magic is the art of communicating with the spiritual powers in nature and in ourselves. Nature societies throughout history have known that trees, stars, rocks, the sun and the moon are not dead objects or mere resources, but living beings who communicate with us.
Wonderful. Yeah, it does show the connection between also deeply the role of magic also in ecological activism, yes, in the way that you need to interlace your practices with an understanding and a sensitivity to nature. So maybe now we can go back to to Judith and to show the last excerpt. So we wanted to show we're moving in time. We're going to 81, where Kenneth Anger made this film called Lucifer Rising, which has these more pagan element. Judith, maybe we're just going to show the excerpt, and you'll say a few words right after. Is that okay?
Yeah, good.
So, yeah, we just finished the excerpts. Do you want to say a few words about it?
Yeah, so Anger started making this film in 1966, although it wasn't ultimately finished until 1981. It's his last great film, and he conceived this idea of a mythos of Lucifer. His god was Lucifer. Lucifer literally means the light bearer, and Anger saw him as the god of cinema, the bringer of light, the light behind the lens, he called him. And so he takes Aleister Crowley's notion of the new eon of the Egyptian god Horus and kind of turns it into the eon of Lucifer. And it's a very, as you said, it's a much more pagan piece. It's a kind of reconciliation with nature. I think one of the extraordinary things I discovered when I studied it was every little image in this film is taken, there is a meaning somewhere in Anger's revisiting of Crowley's mythos. So that's the tiny frame where you see the mud, another one where you see the elephant stamping on the cobra. All these are references that come from Crowley's Book of Thoth, in which this mythos, which Anger develops, is expounded. It's a very slow film. It has a lot of exteriors in it, and he talks about the people acting in it as not people, but forces moving through nature. And so he's moved from the very kind of beautiful camp interior world of inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, where we don't see anything of an exterior world. Everything is inside the mind of a magician, to this kind of different vision of nature with a new eon starting, and one for Anger very much, in which as a queer magician, he is able to practice openly, and all these ideas about reconciling different genders and moving beyond gender are able to be expressed. If in the film itself, we see the film director Donald Cammell playing the Egyptian god Osiris, and Marianne Faithfull as the goddess Lilith, and there's a kind of reconciliation of opposites of male and female opposites going on constantly throughout the film. So, and it's interesting to see it in the light of Arthur Evans' ideas. I think they were incredibly different. Anger was never involved in eco-activism, although the images of the film kind of speak to that. He was very much an individualist, but I think there are all sorts of linkages and kind of something of a family tree developing there.
Yes, and so we can also understand that there are so many different opposite poles also from queerness who does use magic for different aims. So it could be closer to nature, but not at all close to ideas moving outside of capitalism or patriarchy, such as Arthur Evans promoted. So maybe we could actually go back to Arthur Evans, and there is this great chapter in the book that you just translated called Magic and Revolution. And it would be great to hear you talk about the way that Arthur Evans was so advocating for not only nature, but for a revolution that had to be magical, which also makes a lot of links with Romain and Lolov theoretical ritual from earlier this afternoon.
Yes. So maybe let's get to the second quote then. And
oh, that's me.
no worries.
Here.
So because he's really clear, I think I don't have to comment a lot. He says, if we are ever to overthrow the industrial patriarchy, I believe we must tap into deeper energies that the ruling classes of Christianity and industrialism have always desperately tried to deny and repress. These are the energies of magic. By tapping into magic, we tap into nature's own power of defending herself, her corrective for civilization. We give avenues of expression to a natural force for correction and balance that otherwise would never even be acknowledged. We are in league with the memories of the forest and our own forgotten fairy selves, now banished to the underworld. Let us invoke our friends, the banished and forbidden spirits of nature and self, as well as the ghost of Indian, wise woman, faggot, black sorcerer, and witch. They will hear our deepest call and come. Through us, the spirits will speak again.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, I love this quote because we can see how much, in his view, like politics and magic or politics and spirituality are intertwined. So, like, it's even if like one cannot exist without the other. And yeah, what else to say about? I don't like. He would really like see how in this moment, like, so there was a moment of big like gay liberation, as we already said, like there were a lot of advancements, but he would really also see how much capitalism was there, capturing those new audiences. So gay capitalism is really as old as the gay movement. Like in San Francisco, where he was, like a lot of shops, a lot of saunas, and there were actually like a lot of them were actually owned by straight people, you know, like getting a new market. And for him, this was as important as the rest, like to fight this gay assimilationism, because he really didn't believe at all in gay capitalism for good reasons, I think. And so that's why he really thought that it was super important to come with another narrative, and that one in which he comes with. And he would call it also kind of a magical socialism, because he's obviously very disappointed about the socialist experience of the Soviet Union. And so he thinks like we have to reinvent a more bottom-up, also spiritual socialism. And he has like views and ideas which are a bit naive for now that we read them, but they were really powerful and really, like, I think, strong for the time that he was writing.
Mm. So maybe both of us, you could tell us why today you wanted to make this translation, Julien, and why you wanted to do this exhibition, and what was the reception of the exhibition, but maybe there is still some outcome today. And for you also, how did you exchange with people around these notions that are quite old, but that comes anew today?
Yeah, I mean, besides the call from the Getty to make the show, I think what became immensely clear early on, and what was really interesting to me as a historian, was to look especially at the pre-Stonewall movement, and this idea that, yes, of course, the laws, especially in the US and everywhere else, were oppressive on the whole, but there were communities that were finding each other and finding ways of life and a kind of free-form sexuality and gender, especially in the world of people like Parsons and under Crowley's, interest in kind of all perversions of sexuality, whether or not, say what you want about his own, what he did. But he did allow this kind of thinking that was really, in some ways, I think, much closer to our today contemporary interest in a kind of fluid gender and sexual expression, because this was pre kind of identity formation. People were not using the term queer, they're not using really the term gay, lesbian, etc. And so there's a kind of freedom in these spheres that I think really resonated. And then the second thing I'll say, and maybe if you go, there's one image with a big audience at the end, just to say that the reception was far greater than anything I had anticipated. And what happened again was people coming up and saying, now I understand why I was so interested in science fiction, or why reading science fiction, or why my interest in esotericism was so tied to my queer identity. It felt like we really put our finger on something that a lot of people had felt but not really seen in kind of historical context. And so that really felt kind of amazing, and in part why we wanted to make the map, because people had like maybe one or two inroads, knew one or two figures, but didn't know the others, and it really kind of explained for them a phenomenon that they had felt but not kind of historically been explored in the same way. And I'll just put a quick pitch to read. I mean, obviously everyone's essay in the book, but Judith's is really amazing, and how well she articulates how Kenneth Anger really takes gender fluidity and sexual fluidity throughout the entire film, and that was something that really kind of felt like was very resonant to today.
Thank you. So I guess for me personally, what caught me to this book is I would say the quest for ancestors, and in this case, it's interesting because actually both ancestors from really ancient times that are stories are taught in the book, from obviously the antique time in Europe, but also Middle Age and stuff, but also more recent ancestors. Actually, Arthur Evans for me is an ancestor. He was there during those times, and he died in 2011. And so his book is also a mark of the of a time, and why it matters? Well, because in these times where actually the recent years, the fight against queer rights has been more stronger than ever. We see quick, swift all over the world, of things that 5 years ago even people wouldn't think possible in terms of attacking queer rights and women rights and stuff. Obviously, we didn't know this when we started the project, but the thing is that there is maybe a strength in the way of looking deeper, having a deeper conception of time, going through times of losses and time of despair, and how do we find the strength to keep on fighting. We were discussing yesterday on how hard it is to keep fighting, for an archive center in California now in Trump's America, for instance. Well, I think Arthur Evans and others offer us this perspective of showing us hundreds of ancestors. And well, it turns out a lot of them have been eradicated. It's true. But also there's a lot of stories of resilience. And also what is really nice and surprising is that they could take so many shapes. So for me, obviously, witches could resonate. Pagan priest, in the Greek world, would be quite famous images, but I know the thought of the Cathars or other heretics to be potential queer ancestors, and I think that's what is beautiful, is to really find and to see all the shapes we can take as margins of the society to always keep this thread on.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause to Alexis, Julien and Judith. Maybe we can open to some questions if there is any.
Thank you very much for your talk. I had a very naive question. Julien, you said that you were looking for ancestors, and so I was wondering if you personally practice any sort of magic. And for you, Alexis, you said that this exhibit was your first encounter with this field. Did it change anything about your relation to magic, rationality, or that sort of things? And perhaps, Judith, you also have something to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's not naive at all, and it's actually, I already had this question in a previous presentation of the book, and I'm happy because it's quite a hard question to answer, obviously. But yeah, for me, the practice of ritual, basically, and what I really like in Arthur Evans is that, and maybe that's a big distinction to others that we were talking about, is that he doesn't define any dogma or really a precise recipe. He's basically saying, find a bunch of friends, you share a condition, and create a ritual. It's very much in the sense of Starhawk, and she actually, Starhawk in Dreaming the Dark, that is here in the library, gives very concrete but very simple on how to do a ritual that matters for you. And I think that's where it really helps me most in the way of gathering with other people. To me, it's deeply collective, this thing. So I don't do so much personal magic practice, but definitely collective. And one of the elements I really like, especially living here in Europe, is the Wheel of the Year. So connecting to the, let's say Celtic or pagan celebrations, which are Beltane, Yule, now we're approaching the winter equinox, There are 5, big celebrations around the year, and just like marking the season, getting to know, oh, actually, the landscape around me is changing, and all of those pagan celebrations are really good ways to help you go through and realize how the landscape is changing around you and indicating you the energy of that moment in the year. So I guess that would be something that grounds me really much.
I'll just say quickly, I echo Julien's idea that it's a very kind of community-oriented practice, and so I'm grateful to have had this exposure. But more than anything else, it really reshaped my understanding of kind of early queer organizing and community building. And I think I take a lot from what Julien was saying at the end about how there are models and recipes out there for how to build resistance and how to have thriving communities even under certain realms of oppression. And those come in all different areas, including occult, esoteric, science fiction, magic, queerness, witchcraft, whatever you need it, it's out there. You can find it in history. Maybe that's the historian in me. But feeling like those are really relevant, especially right now.
Maybe Judith, you want to answer?
Yeah. I've been involved in pagan witchcraft and magical practice for over 40 years. I came to it through the goddess spirituality movement in the 1970s, and that was kind of solidified through the women's peace camp at Greenham Common and other places. And I think it's really important to understand that for many of us, the practice of magic and of witchcraft is intrinsically anti-hegemonic. It's exactly as Arthur Evans says, it's a rebellion against the patriarchy and against capitalism, and it has been, as he points out, that way for hundreds of years. So we're kind of carrying on in that tradition, and also echo everything that Julien said about the efficacy and the wonderfulness of celebrating the pagan wheel of the year, because it changes your relationship with the world around you. It alters your relationship with the non-human, the more than human. So it's fundamentally important to me.
Other questions? Yes. Vasilis has a question.
Thank you very much. I was struck by the presentation, by seeing all the material that you presented, of the pluralities of narratives that were used, and they were woven into different storylines, different dogmas, different ideas, different processes. And it just made me think the possibility also of how things emerged in the context of California or Los Angeles, particularly because of the fact of the film industry being also based there, an enormous industry of narrative construction and multiple narratives also, particularly narratives that to the majority of the industry, reinforces the dominant ideology of, patriarchal society or specificities around genders, bodies. So also this kind of like resistance or also the possibility of like film being an edited format, also magic as well, and practices being edited formats of multiple sources which could be utilized freely in a way. In opposition to, let's say, the dominant religion or the mainstream religion. So I'm interested in this kind of, because obviously with Kenneth Anger, it's visible, this resistance to the dominant film processes. So as narrative forms, what can it give us today, also in the moment where narrative forms are so challenged by the technologies that we're facing or we're already utilizing?
Maybe Judith, you want to answer?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting and important question. And one of the things I really discovered through researching Kenneth Anger's own kind of ancestry is that the presence of the occult and of heterodox spirituality in California predates the film industry by quite a long way. Lexi mentioned that idea of the frontier, and it's so true the Theosophists that went west and had established their headquarters in Pasadena in, I think, 1895. And so there was a kind of, burgeoning of different occult ideas, magical ideas that was well established. The film industry did not come to California until about 1913. Most of the early film studios were in Fort Lee, New Jersey, but the weather and the light were no good. So they that's why they became established on the West Coast. And by the time, so you find that occult practices and occult people inform the production of Hollywood right from the beginning. Aleister Crowley's sort of main ambassador in the West Coast was a movie actress called Jane Wolfe, and the Crowley's Church of Thelema was founded at the beginning of the 1930s in LA, and there's never been a Church of Thelema anywhere else. That was kind of the only one, and so you get these occult ideas influencing film production in so many ways, from the very, very mainstream. If you think of the Wizard of Oz with all its Kabbalistic influences, and you think maybe of the more kind of seminal and gentle work of director Jacques Tourneur, I Walk with the Zombie, and so on, who, are profoundly influenced by the occult. But what Anger's doing is rejecting the narrative codes of Hollywood and re-establishing a very experimental and an avant-garde set of codes. He begins to touch on narrative a little in Lucifer Rising, but in perhaps one of his most interesting pieces of work is Invocation of My Demon Brother in 1969, which one lovely film writer commented, it has no center of gravity. Every frame has equal weight. You're not allowed to rest in narrative at all in this. You have to confront the magical, and you have to confront the anti-narrative, and you have to confront the taking apart of the sensorium. And it's a very radical piece. There are so many things we could say about that, but I'm going to hand over to the others because I've said too much.
Thank you, Judith. Did you want to say a word about it, Lexi? I think, Judith, you're the specialist of film.
Let's say, something that is a whole other conversation, but just what Judith said, and also Freemasonry is something we haven't mentioned, but Freemasonry is huge, especially in Los Angeles, and especially many of the people who are working in Hollywood are actually Freemasons, which is also a whole other tenet, but just to kind of carry on the overlap of what's happening in California and how it's really different in a lot of ways from the rest of even the US, and how that kind of has a huge influence.
Thank you. Is there other questions? No? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.